contract study. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline the following. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like the regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. To raise a point of order during the meeting, committee members should ensure their microphone is unmuted and say point of order to get the chair's attention. The clerk and the analysts are participating in the meeting virtually today. If you need to speak with them during the meeting, please email them through the committee email address. The clerk can also be reached by his mobile phone. For those people who are participating in the committee room, please note that masks are required unless seated and when physical distancing is not possible. I will now invite the Minister to make her opening statement. Minister?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'm pleased to appear before you to discuss our request for funding in the main estimates for 2021-22, as well as the Departmental Plan 2021-2022 for Public Services and Procurement Canada. With me today, Deputy Minister Bill Matthews, Associate Deputy Minister Michael Van de Graaff, and Chief Financial Officer OGGO Zelonka.
As a central service provider to other government departments, PSPC is responsible for a multifaceted and broad mandate. Mr. Chair, as you know, PSPC continues to play a pivotal role in fighting the pandemic. Our goal right now is to get as many COVID-19 vaccines into the country as soon as possible. Thanks to a diverse portfolio of vaccines that we began building as soon as vaccine candidates showed promise, we are making progress. As of today, more than 28 million doses of Health Canada authorized vaccines have arrived in Canada. The provinces and territories have administered more than 24 million doses. More than 66% of all Canadian adults have received at least one dose. In fact, as of today, Canada leads the G20 in terms of percentage of the population with at least one dose of vaccine. And I continue to push our suppliers for more vaccine doses to be delivered earlier than scheduled. Members may also be aware that we are already planning for the future, having established a contract with Pfizer for doses in 2022 and 2023, with options to extend into 2024. The agreement provides us with 65 million doses with access to up to 120 million more. Tout cela est le fruit d'un travail.
It has been a true Team Canada effort, which will continue until we are all past the pandemic. At the same time, as outlined in this fiscal year's departmental plan, PSPC will continue to deliver on other government commitments, including those related to promoting diversity and inclusion, fighting climate change, and fostering economic recovery. One of our top priorities remains delivering on the national shipbuilding strategy. We are making important progress, but shipbuilding is complex, and we need to continuously improve. We continue to deliver ships for the Coast Guard and Navy, and we are also growing the shipbuilding industry in Canada, contributing $1.4 billion to Canada's gross domestic product and approximately 12,800 jobs every year. We will continue to work with national defense, the Canadian Coast Guard, and industry to renew Canada's federal fleet of combat and non-combat vessels.
on, we are taking new approaches to federal procurement. We plan to grow participation from businesses led by Indigenous peoples, Black and racialized Canadians, women, LGBTQ2 Canadians, and other underrepresented groups, building on successful pilots and enhanced outreach efforts to these business communities. Mr. Chair, this is a priority for me personally. Our modernization efforts also include moving forward with a new and innovative cloud-based electronic procurement solution. The solution, called Canada Buys, allows businesses, big and small, to bid more easily on tender opportunities and manage contracts and orders for goods and services from the government. I can tell you that we have already been using Canada Buys for procurements related to COVID-19, such as gowns and cloth masks. Mr. Chair, these are only a few of our priorities for 2021-2022. To achieve these bold undertakings and support the government's work, PSPC is requesting over $4.4 billion in the 2021-22 main estimates. This represents a net increase of $443 million over last year's main estimates. De cette somme,
Of that amount, $285 million is for real property repairs and maintenance, which will help us protect asset integrity, continue advancements in sustainability, carbon neutrality, and accessibility, and to protect the health and safety of public servants during and after the pandemic.
this has been an unprecedented time in Canada's history, but we can now see a way out of this pandemic. As we continue to support Canada's response to COVID-19, my department will keep working to provide the other essential services that Canadians expect from us. In closing, I look forward to working with my fellow parliamentarians and our dedicated public servants to move these plans forward. And I would like to thank profusely our interpreters for their incredibly hard work, not only today, but throughout the past year during the pandemic. Thank you. Merci. Megwetch.
Thank you, Minister. And now we will start our first round of questionings for 6 minutes with Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Minister and witnesses, welcome back. Minister, I'm looking at your departmental results from last year. PSPC achieved just 57% of its targets. Do you find that acceptable? You're unmuted, Madame.
Je m'excuse. We are offering high-quality services and programs to support the daily operations of governments, and we provide value and sound stewardship on behalf of all Canadians. I believe that is what is emphasized in our department results report.
So you don't believe the actual setting targets is important if you're only achieving 57% of them? Like the whole point of the point of the departmental plans is to set out your priorities and your goals for the coming year and justify spending. But PSPC achieved a quite dismal 57% last year. I mean, what is the department doing to improve this? And do you find like 57% acceptable? I think you were a law professor. Would you pass someone at 57%?
Well, Mr. McCauley, we certainly always need to do better. I will also say that there are areas of the departmental report where we don't have performance indicators because we need a baseline and we need to have good data in order to track our performance. And in that respect, we will continue to work hard to do better. I'd also like to mention that we've been
I'm going to take back my time, Minister. Canada Post has lost $1.1 billion, almost $1.2 billion over the last couple of years. Now, the Canada Post Corporation Act requires it to operate at a self-sustaining basis financially. So what is the plan going forward to ensure fiscal sustainability with Canada Post?
Well, I will say that we have been in close communication with the Board of Directors of Canada Post regarding its path towards financial sustainability. And indeed, we were all working very hard to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, which to some extent did cloud the
100
agenda
million of their
going
loss. So there's
forward.
still $1 billion. You mentioned the Board of Directors. Have the board, for the record, have the board submitted their corporate plan to yourself yet? Because I haven't seen it published in a while. Has it been submitted?
I will reiterate that we have been in very close
Thanks,
touch
Minister.
with
It's
the
a real
board on
simple
this.
question. Has the Board of Directors, as you've mentioned, you've been in close contact with them, have they submitted the corporate plan to you? Because again, I haven't
For
seen
the-
it published in a while.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. McCauley. I will ask my Deputy Minister to respond to that question.
Simple yes or no, Mr. Matthews.
There's been ongoing discussions with the corporate plan, and they're
A simple
updating right
yes
now.
or no, please. Has the board submitted its corporate plan?
Mr. Chair, we have been in touch with Canada Post. They've submitted documents, and it's being finalized. But obviously, COVID is having an impact on the corporate plan, so it takes some extra time to work through it.
So we did not have a plan the year before COVID, and we still don't have a plan, is what you're saying. I want to pop over, just so we've discussed a lot in committee about buying PPE with forced labor from China. Now, we understand there's very minimal guidelines about purchasing. Both Mr. Matthews and yourself, Minister, stated you would do more. What actual concrete actions have been taken, and I want to hear actual actions, to ensure that we're not bringing in any PPE that was made by forced labor from Xinjiang province?
Well, thank you for the question. When awarding our contracts, we, first of all, require suppliers to agree to terms and conditions prohibiting these labor practices. Second of all, we conduct integrity checks into each supplier's background. Third of all, I wrote to suppliers of glove manufacturers in particular to seek assurance from them that they were not using forced labor practices. Those are three solid items that we have
It's mostly
undertaken.
self-attestation, but I understand the CBSA rules requires companies to actually show suppliers going back to prove it's not being used, and yet we're doing self-attestation, it appears. Are we not following the CBSA rules for importation?
Well, of course, I can speak to PSPC.
But this is
actions.
taxpayers buying these items. Do we not follow the law?
We do follow the law, Mr. McCauley, and we take it very seriously. In fact,
Do we
go
follow the
over and
rules as set
above.
out by CBSA?
We go over and above in terms of seeking attestations from the suppliers
But the
regarding
CBSA
forced
states very
labor.
clearly what is required.
Point
It's
of
not
order,
self-attestation.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying my best here. This is an exceptional discussion, but I'm trying my best here to listen to the minister's response here to my colleagues' questions. And may we please allow the minister time to respond to those questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kazmierczuk. I would ask that everybody be respectful of time commitments and giving quality answers as well as questions and allowing for that discussion to continue. Thank you. Minister, if you can answer.
Sorry, there were so many questions being thrown at me. I'd appreciate having the question that he would like answered repeated. Thank you.
Mr. McCauley, you still have 35
The question
seconds.
is, CBSA sets out, and Government of Canada therefore sets out very specific requirements to ensure we're not bringing in goods made with slave labor. The government or the Parliament has stated what's happening over in that Xinjiang province is genocide. PSPC only seems to be using self-attestation. Why are we not following what's laid out by the CBSA?
Well, Mr. McCauley, I believe it is an assumption that you are making in your question relating to the practices at the border. In fact, we are working very hard with our colleagues at CBSA as well as labor to make sure that the goods that come into this country are not produced by forced labor. And finally, I am not certain where you are getting the figure of
Thank you, Minister.
57%. It's not in the document to my knowledge.
Thank you, Minister.
From the Treasury
Thank you, Mr.
Board.
McCauley. We will now go to Mr. Johari for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, thank you, Minister, and welcome to our committee. I'd like to thank you and your team for your tireless effort over the many months and last year and a half. Minister, I'd like to get a couple of things on the record, if I may. Can you tell us how many committees over the last year or so have you testify at? I believe you're on
Thank
mute,
you so
Minister.
much for the question. I'm not on mute on my end. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I have testified at 5 committees over the past year, and that has been a total of 14 plus hours at these committees. It's always a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the question.
Thank you. Great. And of course, we appreciate all the time that you've made and your team has made over the last year, as I said. Minister, as I'm sure you've seen it for yourself, when talking about vaccine, there is no shortages of opinion, whether informed or otherwise. We've heard from random question and baseless speculation thrown about in an often desperate search for conspiracy, but without consideration for the knock-on effect that these doubts may cause. And we've all seen reporting of vaccine hesitancy, vaccine shopping, and many without credential, if I may add, questioning the science and how we secure our data. When we look to politicians for medical advice rather than licensed and expert medical official, I'd say that we are heading down a dangerous road when we do or when such action is taken. Minister, if Canadians have questions regarding vaccine and what's right for them and their loved ones, who they should speak to and which data should we use as a base?
Well, thank you for the question. Of course, this isn't an issue particular to PSPC, but as a general matter, I believe they should speak to their local regional authority or health authority, as well as their physician.
Thank you. So let's talk about a little bit about availability of supply. Can you provide us an update on the status of vaccine procurement and whether Canadians should be concerned about vaccine supplies?
Most definitely. 28.4 million doses of vaccine have been distributed to the provinces and territories. 24.1 million doses have been administered to date. 66% or 2/3 of eligible Canadians have received at least one dose of vaccine. And as of today, Canada is first in the G20 for the percentage of the population that has received at least one dose of vaccine. You'll recall when I was at the committee in the past, I had mentioned that we would see a rapid increase in the importation of vaccine to this country, and that has in fact happened. We have, through our negotiations, accelerated 28 million doses of vaccines to earlier time periods in this year, which allows us now to be accelerating the doses that are being distributed to provinces and territories. Our work is not done. By the end of June, there will be enough vaccine for all Canadians who wish to receive one to have at least one dose, with second doses underway. By the end of September, all Canadians who wish to have 2 doses of vaccine will certainly be able to, if not sooner.
Thank you, Minister. I recall in last time when you appeared in this committee, I asked you a question about how many doses would we have available in September? And we're talking about roughly about 118 million. Has that number changed?
The number of vaccines that are coming in to this country continues to accelerate. And at the current time, we do expect over 100 million vaccines in this country prior to the end of September.
Okay, thank you. And what challenges do you feel that it's been overcome? And do you foresee in coming weeks or months or years that we should, we shouldn't be facing any of those challenges? And we're confident that we are confident about our.
Well, obviously, we are working in an extremely strained environment where all countries are seeking access to vaccine as one way through this pandemic. The environment is incredibly competitive and supply chains are ramping up. And so supply chains are what we are watching on a daily basis to make sure that we are able to get product vaccine into the country as soon as possible. One way that we've managed this unpredictability of supply chains in a competitive environment is we have worked with our suppliers, Pfizer, for example, to move the supply chain from Europe to the United States. So as of the beginning of May, we have started to bring Pfizer doses in from Kalamazoo, Michigan, as opposed to Europe. We are in discussions with Moderna at the current time to ensure that we can make a similar shift and move the supply chain from Europe to the United States so that we can increase the stability, especially in transportation of doses of vaccine coming into Canada.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Dr. Kitchen. Thank you, Ms. Anand, and the public servants here with us today. I feel that you guess I'm going to ask you questions about the national strategy for naval construction. Within that strategy, in 21-22, you're expecting to have a second offshore Arctic patrol boat. The MTR should come into effect this year in 2021. Are you going to sign the partnership agreement, the strategic partnership with the third shipping yards, which should be Davie, theoretically? So normally that should end around June 21st. How are the negotiations going to include a third partner in the specifications? Thank you for the question. The negotiations concerning the request for a third shipyard, the negotiations are ongoing. Currently, Davie has asked for a prolongation or an extension of the process, and the Canadian government has accepted that request. So let's come back to the NPR. You agree with some of the operational tests done on the first one, and what problems were identified during the test? Thank you for the question. Maybe I can ask my Deputy Minister to provide an answer. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It's normal to take some time to verify the quality of equipment on the ship when the ship has been accepted. So during the exams by the Transnational and the Coast Guard, we identified certain problems, and it's up to the shipyard to solve those issues. Yes, so what problems were identified from the start? I think we noticed there was an issue with the engine, but it's normal. It's important to ask the client to check that everything works well before accepting the product. Fine. In December 2020, we heard government planned to extend the Eskimo to shipyards near Vancouver, which is the last shipyard belonging to the government. What progress has been made as far as the Eskimo shipyards? I believe there are some decisions and recommendations on that issue right now, but for a specific answer, I'll ask my deputy minister to offer an answer. Thank you. The Esquimalt facility is working for all industries. Well, that's not really my question. No, I was wondering what progress has been made in enlarging and repairing the shipyard. That's what you're asking? Sorry. Yes, we have a plan to meet that target. It would take time, and it's the same thing with the other naval shipyards. And I believe the third would follow a similar process, but we don't yet have a specific date. But there's a plan to do so in Vancouver. When I'm thinking of Esquimalt, I'm thinking about repairs worth about $3 billion. I hope there is a concrete plan to spend the $3 billion. Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if the question is being asked to me or Madam Minister. Well, let's go with you, Mr. Deputy Minister. Yes, I've read such a figure in the media, but we are still checking in terms of planning. It's not complete yet, so I cannot share any concrete figure with you. But is there a plan in place without providing any concrete figures? Mr. Chair, we are looking at different options because there are certain issues that have to be resolved. But we are developing a plan currently. Based on what I heard, and let's go with the Vancouver shipyards, I heard that Esquimalt yards have been rented to different businesses. This 80% has been rented by Vancouver Shipyard Seaspan. What are the rental revenues that Seaspan pays the Canadian government for use of the Esquimalt naval yards? Once again, thanks for the question. That's a very detailed question. I will ask my deputy minister to provide an answer, but I can say that it's not really for construction, it's rather for maintenance.
The Deputy Minister would be able to provide that answer in writing to the clerk. Appreciate that. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you. And I just want to briefly, just if I can get an overview from the minister, I want to welcome her back. I know she's been before us multiple times and certainly been under the hot seat of this committee on multiple occasions. And so I'm hoping that we can just get a couple of figures out and a couple of summaries out in a more amicable way, perhaps. In total purchases, if you can just give us an overview in terms of vaccine delivery, total delivery to date, and the overall confirmed purchases for delivery of the COVID vaccines of all variations.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for welcoming me back. I will say that we have already had delivered to Canada 28.4 million doses of vaccine, and we expect to have over 100 million doses delivered before the end of September. And I'll ask my Deputy Minister if he'd like to provide more detail.
That's okay. That will suffice. It's just the numbers that I wanted to work off of. Very ambitious, and I know you've touted having the most diverse portfolio in the world. Through you, Mr. Chair, you'll recall on numerous occasions we've been back and forth about the TRIPS waiver, about the government's access of COVAX. There are reports today coming out of the CBC touting that although we are investing more dollars into the COVAX, that what countries are actually asking for are vaccines. And so I'm wondering if the minister has given consideration to our surplus, or like, you'll recall with AstraZeneca and some of the, I'll say politically constructed hesitancy, partisan hesitancy that was put out there around AstraZeneca. I'm just wondering what considerations the minister has planned for in terms of, the fact that we are well above what our requirement would be for these vaccines. We're going to have a surplus.
Well, you're correct in saying that Canada is among the top contributors to the COVAX advanced market commitment. As I've mentioned at this committee before, we've invested at $220 million to support equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. In terms of donations of actual vaccines, if we have a surplus of vaccines, that is an issue that I care about deeply and have been in discussions with my colleague Karina Gould and Patty Hajdu, ministers also engaged on this file, and we will have more to say on this issue shortly.
I'll just quote that the World Health Organization's Director General reiterated the long-running concerns that Western nations are vaccinating their people at really high rates, but of the 1.8 billion vaccines administered globally, just 0.4% have been administered in the low-income countries. He states that this is ethically, epidemiologically, and economically unacceptable. You'll know that there's been an ongoing conversation exchanged through you, Mr. Chair, with the Honourable Minister on TRIPS, and of course I continue to talk about what I believe to be the value of having a waiver, a patent waiver on vaccines. But of course, that also goes to other critical elements of PPE and medical supports as it relates to our response internationally. So I wonder if, through you, Mr. Chair, the Honourable Minister, notwithstanding, all of the shifts within the Biden administration, if there has been a shift in the cabinet's position, to at some point come out and provide the TRIPS waiver for not just vaccines, but extended to all critical medical care as it relates to COVID.
Well, thank you for the question. I will say that Canada is ready to discuss waiving intellectual property protections, particularly with respect to COVID-19 vaccines under the WTO agreement on TRIPS. Our government continues to be a leader in the global effort to ensure there's equitable access to vaccines and critical medical supplies around the world. You'll recall that we have sent supplies, ventilators, oxygenators to India already, and we are a strong proponent of multilateral rules-based trade with the WTO at its core. I've spoken with my colleague, Minister Ng, about this issue as she is leading it at the WTO. She too is committed to equitable access to vaccines in that forum.
But I just, through you, Mr. Chair, I sat in on the trade committee last Friday where they had the ambassador president. They had many delegates, including a particular witness from Médecins Sans Frontières, and they were very clear that we're not leading in this regard. And while there has been retroactively, I'll say, a restoration into the COVAX in terms of our take from that particular program, that there's still a significant need for actual vaccines. And I'm wondering, even for our own possible production of PPEs and vaccines, if the minister has made future plans for Canada become a producer under a TRIPS scenario of PPEs and vaccines.
Well, one of the advantages of pursuing a diversified approach, not only to vaccine procurement, but PPE procurement also, was that we built up Canada's supply chains, and now 40% of our PPE contracts by dollar value are with Canadian manufacturers. In other words, we do have the capacity to be a global leader in sharing of PPE and eventually vaccines when we do have more vaccines in this country, and they are continuing to come in by the million. Through our leadership in the WTO and the Ottawa Group, we're going to continue to be a strong advocate for equitable access.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Green. We will now go to Mr. Second round with starting with Mr. Paul Hoos for 5 minutes.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Madam Minister. First question, I would like to know, we heard in the report number 10 of the Auditor General that contracts for personal protective equipment that was signed, that there were some significant advance payments that were made to these companies without any audits on the companies as such. Could you explain how that happened?
Will. At the beginning of the pandemic, our government worked quickly and decisively to ensure that we procured PPE that our frontline healthcare workers needed. And it was a seller's market, and we needed to act very quickly and to some extent take on additional risk, as the Auditor General mentioned. And we were able, as a result of taking that risk, to procure 2.7 billion items of PPE for Canadians, for frontline healthcare workers, which the Auditor General sanctioned.
Merci,
we have
Madame.
now switched
Thank you,
to
thank you,
a
Minister.
more regular process
thank
of
you.
contracting.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Maintenant, je vous ai...
Yes, I already asked a question during another meeting concerning Frank Baylis on another issue on ventilators. You said you didn't know Frank Baylis. That was in 2019. Let me come up with another name, Monsieur Apito. Does that suggest something?
Not at all. I've never heard that name before.
Parfait.
Oh, great. So if I speak to Michel Otto, who is the owner of Tango Communications, and Alexander Bro, that's the son of Jean Bro, if you do Google searches, Madam Minister, they will take you back 20 years during the sponsorship scandals. These were people that were very involved with the Liberal Party of Canada in the program that was so scandalous that almost wiped the Liberal Party off the map in the 2006 elections. What I would like to know right now, how does a company held by individuals that were related to the sponsorship scandal, how could they so easily have a contract, receive $80 million in advance payment from the Canadian government for masks and equipment that were completely useless, that were no good? And I know there is already some legal action taken by the Canadian government, and Canadians have been swindled by these organizations. And it's my question once again, the person who briefed you when the name of Michel Octeau and Alexander Bro, the son of Jean Bro, when they appeared on your table, what was your reaction?
My first and foremost priority has been to procure PPE and vaccines for Canadians, and we are delivering on that, having procured 2.7 billion items of PPE and being first in the world in terms of the percentage of the population for people.
Okay, merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Madam Minister. With all due respect, you don't have to read your lines. I don't want to listen to vaccine contracts. We're talking about the advance payments representing several $1 million. It's about $80,000 that the Canadian government will probably lose. It took a year to file action before the Ontario Superior Court. I have an email here from the Prime Minister's office, the staffers, managers that said we have an issue. This email is from May 2020, so it's over a year ago. You knew there was an issue. So my question, Madam Minister, I know you started your functions in November 2019, and the pandemic came in 1 year later. But did somebody discuss Mr. Octo, Mr. Bro, nobody raised a flag and said, be careful, because Jean Bro went to prison at the time for swindling Canadians. So were there any red flags raised?
I would like to refer you, first of all, to my priorities, which is procurement for Canadians, and second of all, to the statement of claim, where the government has filed all relevant facts in this matter. I encourage all members to review it because we will fight for taxpayers and their dollars. We will not pay for defective masks, and we have only been clear from the outset that we will hold suppliers to their contractual obligations regardless of who they are.
Dernière question.
Last question. Are there other similar companies that the government should take legal action against? Are there other companies that received advance payments and did not deliver the goods?
Of the hundreds of contracts that we executed in order to support Canadians in this pandemic, there has been one supplier whom you have named that did not provide supplies that were meeting specifications in the contract. We have therefore sued that company, and we will seek recompense for the Canadian taxpayer. That's my priority. We will not pay for defective products.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to Mr. and welcome to the committee, Mr. Zaburi. Mr. Zaburi, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Minister, for being here. And I just want to start off by I loved hearing the great news that Canada, that we are leading G20 countries with respect to first doses. For me, that was new information, and I'm really happy to hear that we are leading. Thank you to you and your team for protecting us all across the country. I wanted to touch upon vaccines and PPE, but vaccines in particular. And we know that this is a preoccupation of Canadians. I'd like to know, with respect to those that have been distributed to the provinces and territories, can you tell us how many have been distributed? Any milestones in relation to that?
Well, thank you so much for welcoming me and for the question. I want to say that we are about to hit a very important milestone of 30 million vaccines distributed to provinces and territories. We're at 28.4 million doses at the current time, and we are expecting 2.4 million doses of vaccine next week from Pfizer, and the week after we will receive 2.4 million vaccines from Pfizer and at least 1.5 million doses from Moderna. So in addition to the very important milestone that we reached today, which is 2/3 of all eligible Canadians receiving at least one dose and being first in the G20 for the percentage of the population with at least one dose, we are on our way to hitting 30 million doses distributed to provinces and territories. And as I said, well over 40 million doses will be distributed to the provinces and territories before the end of June. We are accelerating our deliveries into Canada every single week, and that is the reason why we are first in the G20 for the percentage of the population with at least one dose. It is my priority, it is our government's priority, and we will not stop until all Canadians have access to vaccines.
Thank you. And I'd like to touch upon rapid tests. Can you tell us how many have been procured and distributed throughout the country?
Most definitely. We have procured 43.5 million rapid tests. 41.8 of those million of those tests have been received, and over 26 million of those rapid tests have been distributed to provinces and territories. Of that number, only 3.1 million tests have been used to date. So we very much wish to encourage the provinces and territories to utilize the rapid tests that they asked for and which we procured.
Thank you. And I'd like to shift gears for a moment to touch upon some points that were brought up at the top of this committee by a member of the committee. And I'm president of the co-president of the Canada Uyghur Parliamentary Friendship Group. And at the top, you mentioned how we are conforming to measures that were introduced by our government at the beginning of this year, in January of this year. And those measures require that we communicate with companies when importing goods into Canada. You spoke about PPE. Can you reiterate what we are doing with respect to PPE to ensure that we're not unwittingly consuming forced labor products?
Well, I want to say right off the top that I personally am leading a department and reiterating at all points of contact with them that we are committed to ensuring the highest ethical standards for government procurement, including preventing human rights abuses, including forced labor in federal supply chains. When awarding contracts, therefore, PSPC requires suppliers to agree to terms and conditions prohibiting these labor practices. We conduct integrity checks into suppliers' backgrounds. We recently launched a request for proposal to conduct a risk assessment to determine which products are at higher risk of being produced using human trafficking, forced labor, or child labor. The results of this assessment will enable us, in turn, to further improve upon our procurement supply chains and protect them in terms of being affected by labor exploitation. Again, I am committed to ethical supply chain management, and I will continue to work to ensure that we are following the rigorous standards that Canadians expect. That's why I have written to certain suppliers already to make sure that they are not sending us product that has been produced by forced labor.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Vignola, you're on mute.
Yes, maybe I should pay more attention. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go with the delivery calendar. I was talking about that earlier a little bit. The main goal is about $70 million to put in place to promote naval construction contracts by national defense. Have there been any follow-up measures?
In touch with the client departments, including DND, in order for us to deliver to Canadians the equipment that is requested, including the naval items that we are discussing today. And it is only through that collaboration with DND that we are continuing to deliver on the national shipbuilding strategy, creating good middle-class jobs right across the country, including contributing $1.54 billion annually to our economy and 15,000 jobs per year. The plan is fully costed, it's fully funded, and
Thank you, Madam Minister. Thank you. Earlier, we briefly spoke about pre-qualifications. I know the DG asked for additional time. However, there are some shipyards that had a time frame later to meet the requirements, but that were pre-qualified. So why is it that DV is taking so long to be qualified, whereas other groups were given extensions to qualify, or they had been pre-qualified? That is a negotiation with the shipyard only. The process is ongoing, and currently, well, we expect to be able to make a decision this fall, but work is ongoing with the Davie shipyards, as I mentioned. And Davie asked for the extension for additional time, so we granted that, and
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Ms. Vignola. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. On page 4 of the departmental plan, where it talks about the purchase of goods and services, you've just referenced in your previous answers on the national shipbuilding strategy. But on page 4, it talks about working with government departments in the industry for Canada's federal fleet of combat and non-combat vessels. You've touted some of the economic benefits, but you'll recall there's a pretty big disconnect between what the DND says the cost is going to be and what our parliamentary budget officer's cost is going to be. So I'm going to ask, as the minister through you, Mr. Chair, will the honourable minister take responsibility should there be an inevitability that this project balloons to the potential of it being an $80 billion project rather than what is estimated with a $50 to $60 billion project? In short, will the minister take responsibility should there be cost overruns, given the variance between what her ADM said as it relates to the taxes and the different formulas versus what our parliamentary budget officer said?
Well, thank you for the question. I just want to be clear because there was a discrepancy, as the honourable member points out. And the point that I want to be clear on is that taxes should not be included in the CSC costing. Why? Because the federal government gets these funds back as a result of reciprocal tax arrangements. And so that is a clarification that I wanted to make sure. So on the record,
we don't pay provincial taxes? We're not going to pay the 10% tax?
There are reciprocal tax arrangements between the provinces and the federal government.
Let me ask this question with more clarity, Mr. Chair. The honourable minister mentioned that it's fully funded and fully costed. What does the minister put in terms of contingency for the costing? Is it 50 to 60 billion, or are they talking about the project being close to the 82 billion?
Well, there are different calculation methods that the member is referring to in terms of what was deployed by the PBO that actually do drive the costs, including the different ways in which taxes are treated. And I will ask my deputy minister
Mr. Chair, through you, without deferring it to the deputy minister, I just have to ask the question. The minister said it was fully funded, so which number is fully funded? The 60 million or the 82 billion? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And that unfortunately is the end of the time, but we would ask that the minister or Mr. Matthews to provide a written answer for Mr. Green's question and provide that committee. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Harder for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Minister, the Prime Minister has often said that, quote, there is no more important relationship than the one with Indigenous peoples, end quote. And in your departmental plan, you talk about the importance of diversity. You also talked about that in your opening remarks and furthering SMEs that are run by Indigenous folks or by women or by those who are Black. But in your mandate letter in 2019, the Prime Minister, he directed you to give 5% of all federal contracts to Indigenous-owned businesses. However, that didn't happen. Why?
Well, thank you for the question. Let me assure you that the target to have at least 5% of federal contracts awarded to businesses managed and led by Indigenous peoples is an objective that I personally am working towards, as well as my department. In fact, PSPC has awarded 40 contracts to 31 self-identified Indigenous businesses, collectively worth $130 million just in the pandemic alone. And we are working across government to ensure that 5% minimum target is in fact reached.
Let me be clear. So that's referring to your 2019 mandate letter from the Prime Minister. It stated that you were supposed to give 5% of all contracts to Indigenous-led businesses, but you actually had that letter scrapped unfortunately, that goal wasn't met. So a new mandate letter was given, and it was just whitewashed, gone. Like, no goal set whatsoever for Indigenous-led businesses. So why? Why run from the problem rather than tackle it head on?
Actually, you're wholly incorrect. That was not scrapped.
Chair, through you, I'm actually just going to pause right there because I'd like you to substantiate the fact that you're calling my claim incorrect. I have the 2019 mandate letter and I have the 2021 mandate letter. So on what basis are you saying I'm incorrect?
If the honourable member would allow me a moment to explain, I will do so. The letter that we were recently provided is in fact supplementary to the 2019 mandate letter. Therefore, the target of having at least 5% of federal contracts awarded to Indigenous businesses stands, and it is a target which we are still aiming to reach. The preamble, in fact, is clear to that the 2019 letter stands if the member would care to read the preamble.
Okay. Minister, I also have the departmental plan, and I've read through from 2018-19, 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021, and 21 to 2022. And interestingly enough, you may or may not be aware of this, but the plan actually says that for goals for women and Indigenous businesses, it's TBD. So I actually have that document right here, TBD. So to be determined. In other words, there's actually no goals set. So, Minister, you're actually misleading the committee right now by saying that there are big goals and that you are achieving them. There are none. None. I have the documents right in front of me. How do you explain that?
Well, point of order, Mr. Chair. Misleading is unparliamentary language.
I would ask that everybody be respectful of each other in their responses and on both sides along those lines. So carry on, Minister.
Well, I did not hear a question in the member's last comment, so I'll wait to hear the actual question. Thank you.
I was just wondering why the minister, through you, Mr. Chair, is choosing to try to mislead this committee as if she has a plan, when in fact I have a document in front of me that shows that she's had 4 years of no plan.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. This is outrageous, Mr. Chair. A point of order, I would actually ask you to make a ruling. That's unparliamentary language. That's not acceptable. An apology is warranted.
Just to suspend for a second. And I thank the member for his comments. I appreciate that. At this point in time, I see that in context of the discussion, and therefore I will allow it to stand at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just waiting for the minister's answer.
Well, as I mentioned, we do have a target in my mandate letter, and that is a target of a minimum of 5% that I and the department are seeking to reach. And once we have the data to establish the baseline, we will measure the percentage increase and measure our performance against that baseline.
Minister, thank you. What's interesting to me, though, is that baseline hasn't been established. So I don't know what you're measuring your success against. Because again, I have 4 years worth of departmental plans that show that there is no plan. There is no benchmark in terms of wanting to procure through businesses that are led by Indigenous people or by women. Minister, my next question is very simple. Did you sign the departmental plans?
Well, actually, I'd like to really correct the member, because
it's pretty simple. The departmental plans are for your department. Did you sign them? Did you sign off?
There's an objective in my mandate letter of a minimum of 5%, and that's the target we're working towards. That's what we're working towards.
Thank you.
Chair,
thank you.
She didn't answer my question.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler. We'll go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I believe this will be my last question.
Minister, we have one. This is the last person up for questions. Yes, Minister.
That's right.
I appreciate you bearing with us as the time is, we're a couple of minutes over, but appreciate that.
Well, I'd like to thank the Minister for appearing in front of our committee again today, and all the officials for being here as well. And I'd like to continue on the topic that we're discussing right now. And Minister, I'd like to address some of the concerns that have been raised about building back better and returning to normal. There's been lots of legitimate concerns discussed on how Canada comes through the pandemic. And of course, as we've been discussing, these include considerations that need to be taken into account to address shortcomings that have been experienced by underrepresented groups. And effectively, there are groups that have historically been excluded and discounted from procurement competitions. And so, Minister, I was hoping you could outline how you and your department are engaging in a more meaningful and impactful way with identified groups to provide greater diversity of both access to and participation in Canada's procurement space.
Well, thank you so much for the question. And I will say that I am very committed to diversifying the federal supply chain for LGBTQ plus and additional diversified and racialized minorities. I think that it's extremely important that minority groups in our country have access to federal supply chains. I spoke just now about the minimum 5% of federal contracts floor that we have in my mandate letter as a target that we are seeking for Indigenous peoples. But in addition to that, and in direct response to your question, I have met with Indigenous businesses, women-led Indigenous businesses, Black-owned and managed businesses, and many other racialized communities to seek their feedback on how we can do better to diversify federal supply chains. In particular, I'd like to mention that with the Black-led and managed businesses with whom I met, we heard of the importance of diversification in federal supply chains. And in particular, what we did in response was to launch pilot projects, which were procurements directed specifically at Black-owned and led businesses, so that we could begin the very important process of gathering data relating to the supplier community and what we should be doing better from a procurement standpoint. In particular, we are launching and have launched indeed the e-procurement system, and that is going to allow us through electronic means to gather data about the suppliers that are applying for federal contracts. Once we have that data and spread that system across government, we will be able to have the race-based data, the gender-based data that we need to evaluate our performance. So in short, diversifying the federal supply chain is an extremely important issue for me personally and for our government. And In that regard, we have led targeted procurements to the Indigenous business community as well as to the Black business community, but our work is not done. We have more road to travel to meet the minimum mandatory 5% floor for Indigenous businesses, which is contained in my still valid 2019 mandate letter. And we will keep walking down the road of diversification in federal supply chains to ensure that the Canadian economy represents the demographics of this country. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Minister. And I was wondering if you might be able to speak to some specific examples that you wish to highlight in this space to show where we have had potentially some successes or some challenges in advancing on those goals.
Well, I would like to reference the new Black Businesses Procurement Pilot, which under my leadership and the department's leadership, we launched in January across Canada, which aims to expand bidding opportunities to small businesses that are owned or led by Black Canadians. To date, we have launched 12 pilot procurements posted thus far. We've also been holding roundtable discussions with Black businesses to hear firsthand how we can increase their participation in the procurement process. In addition to having these additional roundtables with Black businesses, I want to mention our relationships and conversations with Indigenous businesses. In August 2020, we signed contracts with 7 Indigenous firms that met the established criteria for the targeted procurements that we launched, worth approximately $3 million for a total of 15 million non-medical disposable masks. Then again, in October 2020, we amended one of the contracts to exercise the option to procure an additional 20 million non-medical disposable masks for an additional 2.94 million. In other words, what I'm trying to indicate is that even though we're responding to the pandemic with PPE procurements and vaccine procurements, making sure that we diversify federal supply chains has continued to be a priority for me.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that. We want to be respectful of your time and appreciate you being here. And with that, that's the end of questions that we have for the Minister. The officials are going to remain with us, and in order for us to get a little bit back on time, we're going to go with just 5 minutes for the first round, and we will be done at 6 so that we can continue. So we'll start with Mr. Paul Hoos for 5 minutes.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Matthews, I would like to know how many contracts were awarded with anticipated payments, early payments by Public Service Canada? Thank you for the question. Sorry.
Where about 30% of contracts were having advance payments. That has obviously dropped off significantly as the market has settled. So contracts now, you're rarely seeing advance payments. But when we were at the peak of the shortage of supply, roughly 30% of advance contracts were requiring some sort of advance payment. And the amount shifted as well. Early days, it was 30%. Then in a matter of a week or two, it jumped to 50%, and in some cases 100%. So the market was very volatile at that time.
So 30% of the contracts had these advanced payments. On this, could we have, I know you'll say there are hundreds of contracts, but the contracts that merited these advance payments, there are not hundreds of them after the meeting or later. Could we have an exact figure, the number of contracts and the amounts of money involved in this advance payments? The Auditor General is talking about it, but we don't have any detailed information. Is this information available?
I think, Mr. Chair, we can absolutely provide information. What I would suggest, we could do a broader look, but what I would suggest, it was really during the first, I'll say 6 months of the pandemic where advance payments were really an issue that was changing rapidly. So it might be more relevant for the members if we focused in on the first 6 months, but I'll leave it to the member as to what information.
I could add from February 2020 up till July 2020. That could be the target period. Yeah, I would like to know, Mr. Deputy Minister, have you briefed the minister as far as um, the kids in Luxembourg and Michel hospitals? Was she briefed? No. No, the issue of Michel Octo, rather. We didn't know who he was. We learned that after the contract was awarded. So how do such companies, how do they come about quickly having the possibility of selling material for this amount, whereas other Canadian and Quebec corporations that already had warehouses with material could not even have any access to answers? We know there's a buy and sell site. People put all sorts of information in there, but they never got any answers, whereas others, at the snap of their fingers, seem to get contracts. How did that happen? Thank you, Mr. Chair. At that time, so several corporations were not able to provide goods in the necessary time, so we had to find others, companies to assist us.
Our traditional supply chains weren't working. Eventually, we got to a place where we were manufacturing these in Canada, but we used buy and sell, and we were very much looking for rapidity. Okay. So who came in first was very important, and a quick assessment of whether they could deliver or not. But it was very rapid was the key feature here.
Parfait. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. So I'll hand over to my colleague Kelly.
Paragraph, another meeting, nothing for you, I'm afraid. Mr. Matthews, I'm looking at GC Infobase from Treasury Board, and they actually state 57% targets achieved for 2019-2020. The minister says that's incorrect. Is Treasury Board correct, or is she correct and Treasury Board is incorrect?
I think the context is that they're roughly, I think 57, 59% were met. There's about 32% or 30,
on the record, that's what Treasury Board says. Last time you were with us, we were talking about this sole source contract for SNC Lavalin for the mobile health units. How many were actually delivered? I understand SNC said it was 5 mobile health units. How many were actually delivered from SNC?
So the contracts in question, Mr. Chair, were for design, and then deployment is another part. So SNC was on contract to deliver up to 5.
Right.
So they've designed.
So how many did they deliver?
None have been deployed yet because they have not yet been requested by the provinces.
Okay. Whose decision was it? We heard it had to be sole sourced to SNC because it was urgent. No province requested them before it was determined to be urgent and ordered. So who came up with the decision to pre-order these hospitals or these hospital mobile units?
So, Mr. Chair, these is something where you had to forecast into the future to
Oh, I realize that, but was it like PHAC requested it? Like who requested them?
It was PSPC that first identified the need and worked.
Who at PSPC?
Thank you.
Who at PSPC?
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. We'll now go to Mr. Kazmierczak for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Matthews, the Auditor General's report focused on reviewing sort of pandemic activity, and in particular looking at procurement of personal protective equipment, PPE, how your department responded to timeframes, the scale of the competition that was out there, and also the needs of the provincial and territorial governments. The Auditor General report states, and I quote, "When faced with the pressure created by the pandemic, the agency took action." Mr. Matthews, can you comment on the findings of the Auditor General's report and how you think you have identified and responded to the challenges both today and also into the future?
Thank you for the question, Chair. A couple of things. Number one, incredibly valuable work done by the Auditor General, and we take very seriously the findings. I think there's an acknowledgement that the department had to take risk. The supply situation was well understood, and that in order to properly supply Canadians with PPE, there was the need to take risk. I think the Auditor General also identified helpful recommendations for us for the next time, because frankly, we hadn't been through an experience like this, and while you have manuals, there's nothing like a real live exercise, frankly, to better understand where improvements can be made.
Mr. Matthews, by the end of 2020, according to the report, the federal government purchased $7 billion in PPE and medical devices. I can't even fathom that number, what that means. Can you put that into perspective? Maybe looking at past purchases and whatnot. Just can you put that into perspective for us? That is a huge amount.
It is a huge amount, Mr. Chair. I think, there's honestly nothing I could compare it to in terms of experience we've had. I think if you look at the variety of the goods that were acquired for the Public Health Agency of Canada for eventual use by provinces and territories, because that's where they went. Understanding the volumes and the need to put in place contracts that would continue to deliver over time. This was not one delivery and done. This was a delivery, and then ongoing deliveries was a critical aspect. Maybe the context is if you look at the warehouse space that had to be leased to basically properly store these goods that were coming in for the provinces and territories is a really interesting indication in terms of how Public Health Agency stepped up in terms of what needed to be ordered, and obviously with support from PSPC.
And that's a great point, that last point. If you could maybe unpackage that a little bit for me, how did we adapt, or the federal government or the department adapt in terms of storing, distributing, and tracking this again, just an enormous deluge of PPE and medical devices? Can you maybe give us a little bit of a glimpse in terms of how the ministry or the department pivoted a little bit or adapted to that?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So as we evolved our purchasing to go with new suppliers, but also we realized that, frankly, the best approach was to go directly to the manufacturers while we waited for the domestic industries to come online. And so a lot of efforts in terms of on-the-ground logistics in China, rented a warehouse, chartered planes, and then made sure through our client PHAC that there was adequate storage space and logistics in Canada to ensure the goods were delivered as needed.
And one of the parts of the report that caught my eye is the average number of calendar days to procure and deliver equipment to PHAC. And I note, for example, N95 masks, total number of days was 105. This was average number of days from the requisition to contract signature all the way to delivery. So 105 for N95 masks, test swabs, which were in demand, 24 days. Can you put that into a little bit of perspective for us as well, too, in terms of, again, delivery times from requisition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think 2 points. That is definitely quick. And when we were looking to realize contracts, number one, we realized that when there was an opportunity, you had to jump on it very quickly or it was gone. And then an important part of the contract was also when can you first start delivering. So getting that accelerated delivery timeline, a year out, frankly, wasn't useful to us. So we wanted a quick first delivery. And those delivery timelines, when you consider that many of the goods were coming from overseas, was quite fantastic.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, you have 5 seconds.
I'll yield. Thank you.
Thank you. There goes the buzzer there. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Let's go with Phoenix. And the departmental plan, they spent less in 23. They think that they will be less spent in 23-24 compared to 21-22 because of the end of the funding meant to stabilize pay processes, because of some pay issues. They would reduce the number of financial transactions. You're going from 384 transactions January 2018 to 104 in February 2021. That's good. So there was 6 contracts awarded to have a next generation solution for human resources. When will the backlogs related to the pay issues, when would all of those be eliminated? That's the back pay we owe people. When will all of that be cleared out?
Merci pour le...
Thank you. We are trying to eliminate the backlogs as we said in the letter, maybe in about 15 months.
We are on track, and we continually update our approaches to automate where we can and drive efficiency so we can properly continue to make progress on the backlog as it's being done.
Merci.
Thank you. Over the last 2 weeks, I saw reappear certain situations. Public servants were simply not paid. And unfortunately, all the cases were related to females. I don't know if it's just coincidence. These employees don't know why they did not have any notices explaining they owed money. That's why they did not receive their pay. They were totally in the dark. One of them went for over 7 weeks without receiving a cent. How do we explain that these kinds of situations are rising again?
A couple of points here, Mr. Chair. Number one, I think years ago it was far more common where employees would get no pay, and we've worked very hard to make those cases a priority, and you don't see them. They're quite rare now, not to say that there isn't the odd one, there certainly is. And then as we deal with overpayments, because we don't want to surprise people, we have a regime in place where before we start collecting any overpayments, we make sure that the employee has received 3 correct pays consecutively before that collection regime kicks in.
Wow. OK. 3 payes avec des problèmes, c'est bon.
So I'm taken aback. Are there still cases of level 1, 2, 3, 4 to explain the speed of handling these files? 1 being urgent and 4 being there is an issue, but there is no urgency. Does such a scale exist?
Of addressing the backlog, we absolutely still have a priority setting. And obviously, if there's a case where an employee has received no or little pay, that's an urgent one. We've also recently put the emphasis on people approaching maternity leave or paternity leave, on disability. So you've got a series of cases there on severity. So we do
Excusez-moi, j'ai
triage.
aucune traduction. J'ai 0 traduction.
I'm not getting the translation.
Mr. Chair, I gather I should
Maintenant, oui.
pause. I can repeat if that's helpful. So, Mr. Chair, the member's question was around, is there still a priority setting exercise in terms of addressing urgent cases versus less urgent cases? And there absolutely is. And obviously, employees who receive 0 or little pay would be high on that list. We also put an emphasis on employees who are maternity leave, paternity leave, disability. So there is absolutely a triage in terms of how we address cases to make sure that the most urgent get addressed on a priority basis.
So the people that are currently in retirement have deep backlogs in my riding. A woman, another case with a woman, there is $40,000 in pay backlog. I'm not sure if I'm using the right term, but $40,000. This can greatly modify retirement plans, and she's not considered as a priority case. When will these cases be resolved?
Je comprends qu'elle est plus active.
I understand that she's no longer an active public servant.
So in terms of resolving these cases, as mentioned earlier in the member's question, we are on track to resolve the backlog as previously indicated. I can't speak to this case in particular, but we do have the priority setting in place to allow us to address the most urgent cases in a timely fashion as best we can. So we'll continue to work through using that triage system to address the cases in a priority fashion. But I can't speak to.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews, and Ms. Vignol, I gave you a little extra time because of the translation issue to make sure we got the answer. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to take a trip down memory lane. Back when I was a city councilor here in Hamilton, we led an ambitious program to look at surplus city lands that we could provide to social housing and affordable housing providers. And I see on page 31 that PSPC will continue working with partners on the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation-led Federal Lands Initiative, which makes surplus federal real property available for the repurposing of affordable housing. It states that they have a target of 4,000 new or renovated housing units, and they contributed in 2020 15 properties to the FLI to be assessed by the CMHC for suitability for affordable housing, with a total of 75 since the inception of the program in 2018. So I'd gotten excited originally, and then I got into the details and I saw that over 10 years, they were looking at $200 million to be used to subsidize these transfers of lands. And I'm left with some pretty significant questions here, because as a city councilor, I think in my short time in 4 years, I delivered, maybe a half dozen properties or so over to social housing here in Hamilton, and yet across the country, this seems to be a bit of a drop in the bucket. So to begin, I just want to ask through you to the ADM, Mr. Matthews, how are they going to, account for, like, how many properties are being slated for the transfer to the FLI? First of all, how many surplus properties are there? Let's start there.
Excuse me, I'd have to get back to the member in writing with an actual list of the number on surplus, but we're happy to do that. I think there's an ongoing assessment because lots of questions are being asked about the future of work and what kind of space the federal government will need. So that list, may grow as the future evolves. When we do identify a property as surplus, though, it's not right to social housing. There's obviously some consultation that has to take place, which takes a fair amount of time to ensure there's not Indigenous interest, etc. So that process, I think, frequently surprises people just how long it takes. And then the other point I should mention is suitability, which the member already touched on. So it is quite a process that goes through. I think the other point, and I'll wrap up quickly here, is where we are disposing through Canada Lands Company. Canada Lands also redevelops and property and dedicates a certain percentage, I'm going from memory here, 10% for affordable housing as well. So that's another lever that the federal government can use in terms of building that program.
So just to be clear, you're defining affordability as what we called inclusionary zoning, which is just 30% of the units must have affordable options. So 70% are at profit. So I guess if you could just provide us with an insight over just who these properties are being transferred to. Are they transferred to nonprofits or to development companies that are then providing within it an inclusionary zoning earmark of a 30% affordability, like 30% of the units being affordable?
So there's two kind of avenues there. One is through Canada Lands, who would develop. The other is through the CMHC program that has been mentioned. And the driving or the main job for PSPC in this area is to identify surplus properties and then make sure all are consulted on what might be done with that. But our main role here is the identification of the property itself and make sure we follow the proper process from a disposal perspective to ensure we know who's interested.
Would you, when you're providing this in writing, because this is something I'm keenly interested in, again, we were very successful municipally here, it's seemingly at a much faster pace than what we've been able to do federally. Could you provide in writing how many federal surplus lands might be in the GTHA? Because I know municipalities would be looking, potentially to partner and play a role in that. And I'd be keenly interested to know how many are here in Hamilton, although I suspect there's not a tremendous amount. But also, when you reply back in your writing, if you could also look at, or at least provide us with a context for exactly who these are being transferred to, and what does the $200 million look like in terms of this so-called subsidy? Like, is this in closing fees or consulting fees, legal fees, or is this the valuation of the actual total properties over 10 years?
So there's a lot in there, Mr. Chair. We will absolutely get a list of surplus properties. It hasn't been determined who they're going to yet, so maybe it would be helpful if we could give a list of surplus properties that have also been disposed of looking backwards, just to give a sense, but we will split the current list by geography. I think it might also be useful for members if we were to include just the key steps in the disposal process, just so members can appreciate why it takes time to go through this process. And as for the 200 million, just by way of example, the most recent one involving Canada Lands, we offered up some funding to basically remediate some environmental issues on the property as part of the transfer.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews.
Well.
And that's very helpful. Thank you,
Mr. Green. And with that, we now have come to the end of our questioning, and I want to thank Mr. Matthews and Mr. Grift and Mr. Zielonka for being with us today, and appreciate you coming back to our meetings when we have you here. So do appreciate it. You're happy to go. With that said, the public portion of our meeting is now complete, and we will proceed to the in-camera portion. And when I suspend the meeting, the technical staff will end this part of the Zoom. Therefore, every member will need to log off and then log back into using the Zoom identification and the passcode that was sent to you by the clerk. And with that, I will suspend temporarily.
Thank you.